We want to continue our series on the attributes of God, and last time we considered the self-existence of God, or the aseity of God. In this session, we want to look at the spirituality of God. Now, when we say the spirituality of God, we are not using it as we would refer to our spirituality. By that, we mean that God is a spirit being, that God is without a physical body. Therefore, God is invisible. Therefore, God is infinite. That will be our focus in this lesson. But by way of introduction, I want to say that it was A.W. Tozier who said, "The weightiest word in any language is the word for God." The weightiest word in any language is its word for God. There is a gravitas, a heaviness, a weightiness about God in any study of God, and rightly it should be so. We live in a day in which there are many spiritual lightweights who have light, fluffy, superficial thoughts of God that just blow like a tumbleweed across the horizon of the church. We want to come back to deep thoughts about God, great and grand thoughts about who God is, as He is presented in His Word. And so therefore, this study becomes the weightiest of all studies. The study of theology is the study of God. And theology proper is that specific area of theology that focuses upon the person, the being, the attributes, the triunity of God. How we understand theology proper, in reality, defines how we see the other areas of theology. It is the attributes of God that I believe is the greatest lens through which we understand other disciplines of theology. So as we come in our study now to the spirituality of God, there are three words that I want to set before you. First is immaterial, that God is spirit without a material body. Now, when I say God is immaterial, I do not mean that God is unimportant. Quite the contrary, because God is immaterial, He is not immaterial in that sense. Because God is immaterial, He is of enormous importance to us. The key verse on this is John 4, verse 24, in Jesus' discussion with the woman at the well, in which He says, God is spirit. That is a small s. And that is to say that God is without physical composition. And that God does not have a material body like you and I do. God does not have a height that we could measure Him. He does not have a weight that we could weigh Him. God does not have body parts. We read in the Bible verses that talk about the hands of the Lord, the eyes of the Lord. For example, the eyes of the Lord roam to and fro throughout the whole earth. Well, God does not have eyes. God does not wear bifocals. Other verses talk about the arm of the Lord. Isaiah 53:1, the arm of the Lord is not short that it cannot save. Verses talk about the ears of the Lord. Well, if God is spirit, how do we reconcile this? Well, this is a figure of speech. It is called an anthropomorphic expression. That God reveals Himself to us in ways that we can easily understand by assigning human-like qualities to Himself as He reveals Himself to us. The eyes of the Lord roam to and fro throughout the whole earth is simply a way for God to reveal Himself to us, that God sees everything, that God knows everything. In fact, God sees through everything. The arm of the Lord is just God's way of saying to us He is mighty and He is strong. John Calvin, writing in his Institutes on the Christian Religion, explains to us that God is so infinite that as he would communicate to you and me with finite minds, God must come down to our level and communicate to us, if you will, with elementary type talk, kindergarten type talk, we would say today. In reality, even lower than that, baby talk to us. And for God to use these anthropomorphic expressions is an accommodation on God's part to the weakness of our own understanding. But God is not limited to having eyes and ears. If so, then God could only be in one place at one time, right? It is the mere fact that God is without a physical body that allows God to be everywhere at one time. When this session is over, when you go back to your house and when I go to my hotel room, no matter where we go, the Lord is with us. And no matter where we go, the Lord is already there before we arrive. And even when we leave this place, God will remain. And because God is without the spatial limitations of a human body such as you and I have, he therefore can be in all places at all times. What a wonderful feature this is of the Lord. I remember the first time I ever stood up to speak. I was a freshman in college. I played college football for Texas Tech, and we had a weekend of champions with FCA, and I gathered with other football players around the country. There were Dallas Cowboys there, and over the weekend we did various things of Christian activity and ministry with high school students, and on Sunday they would send us out to churches. I had no idea that I was being sent out to a church. Well, they sent me to a church so far out in the middle of nowhere that I looked it up the other day on Google, and even the post office is closed down now. I mean, it's so out there. There was a Baptist church on one side of the street and a Methodist church on the other side of the street, and they had one preacher, and every other week they were Baptist one week, the next week they were Methodist. True story. And it came time for the service to begin, and the pastor said, "I'm so glad that you're here to be bringing the morning message." And I said, "Well, I've never spoken. I don't have a message." And he said, "Well, would you pray?" And I said, "I've never prayed in public, but I would be willing to do that." So as it came time for me to pray, he got up in the pulpit and he said, "And now Steve Lawson plays football for Texas Tech." And I got up and began to make my way to the pulpit, and he said, "Well, now bring the morning sermon." So now here I am, thrown into first time ever to speak for the Lord. And the only thing I knew to say as I stood there and looked out into the eyes of, it seemed like, 1,000,000 people, was that I had come a long way from home to go to college in West Texas, and that I was very much alone, didn't know anyone on this campus of 30,000 students. But there was the verse that I clung to in Hebrews 13, "I will never, never leave you, nor forsake you." That God is with me wherever I go. The only way for that to be possible is for God to be without a physical body, such that he could be with my mom and dad in Memphis, Tennessee. He could be with me out in West Texas as I went to school. Did not Jesus say, "Lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age"? What a wonderful attribute of God this is. His spirituality, that no matter where we go, no matter what we encounter, no matter how alone we may ever be, this God is with us in the fullness of his being. Immaterial is the first word. Second word is invisible. Because he is immaterial, he is invisible. A bodily form can be seen, but not a spirit being. And so therefore, we must live by faith and walk by faith. John 1 verse 18 says, no one has seen God at any time. You know what that literally means? No one has seen God at any time. It means exactly what it says. It says what it means. If you ever hear someone come up to you and say, hey, I've seen God, just write them off as a nut. John MacArthur tells the story of one preacher, a fanatical preacher, who came to him and said, I was shaving the other morning, I was in the bathroom, and God appeared to me. MacArthur said, you mean God appeared to you? He said, yes, God appeared to me. MacArthur said, did you keep shaving? Because if it was God, you would have been on your face on the floor. People trivialize, oh, I've seen God. I've, heard God, whatever. No, you haven't seen God. The only physical manifestation is in His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, and He is seated at the right hand of God the Father. John 6, verse 46 says, not that anyone has seen the Father. It's impossible. Now, there are times in the Bible where God has chosen to reveal Himself with physical light, the bright, shining glory that emanates and radiates from the being of God in the form of light. Yes, God does reveal Himself as bright, shining light in individual situations. Remember, Moses said, show me your glory. And God said, go hide behind the rock, and you will see the afterglow of